This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS. From NorthJersey.com, on April 27th, 2021, Richard Cottingham, the notorious North Jersey serial killer known for dismembering the young women who were so often his victims, publicly confessed Tuesday to drowning two North Bergen girls in a motel bathtub in 1974 and abandoning their bodies in the woods in Montvale. Cottingham, 74, admitted before State Superior Court Judge Keith Bachman that he killed Mary Ann Pryor, age 17, and her friend Lorraine Kelly, 16, when the pair went shopping for bathing suits at a Paramus Mall in August of that year. The white-haired, bearded Cottingham sat at a table in the Bergen County Prosecutor's office in Paramus during the virtual hearing. His attorney, John Bruno of Rutherford, sat next to him and read off the gruesome details of the murders. Cottingham, whose habit of dismembering his victims led to the nickname the Torso Killer, acknowledged that Bruno's statements were true. He admitted he seized the girls and forced Pryor into a hotel room by threatening to hurt Kelly. He then raped them and tied them up at night to keep them from escaping while he slept. He admitted that on August 11, 1974, he drowned them both in the motel room bathtub and dumped their bodies in the Montvale woods, where they were later found. Cottingham pleaded guilty to 2 charges of first-degree murder, for which the state will seek twin life sentences that run concurrent to the life sentence he's already serving. In return, the state will drop other unnamed municipal charges, Bachman said. The court will sentence him on July 9th. He is currently in New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. Bruno said after the hearing that Cottingham finally admitted to the killings because he wanted to bring closure to the victims' families and fulfill a promise to Robert Anzalotti, the Bergen County Prosecutor's Chief of Detectives, who worked the case for 17 years. Cottingham told me this weighs heavily on him because he doesn't know why he did the things he did, Bruno said. He has deep regrets. He still doesn't understand why he did these things, but he feels relief knowing he has come clean for the families and for himself. The confession closes a cold case that haunted North Jersey for decades. Authorities had long suspected Cottingham, who has admitted to 9 other murders since he was first arrested in 1980, but they had been unable to prove it. Retired Bergen County Chief of Detectives Alan Greco said in 2016 that Cottingham, a married father of 3 who grew up in Rivervale, most definitely could have killed the girls. There are many similarities between the manner in which Kelly and Pryor were found and the torture methods he used on others, the detective said, but there was no direct evidence linking Cottingham to the killing. He dropped breadcrumbs over the years, once telling Greco that he remembered picking up a couple of girls by one of the malls, on one of the highways, or near one of the highways, before saying, "I disposed of them out of the area." But the prosecutor's office could not hammer out a deal that would lead to his confession. Cottingham never fit the typical profile of a serial killer, said Peter Bronsky, a Canadian true crime author who met with him regularly over several years. Born in the Bronx, Cottingham grew up with his parents and 3 sisters in Rivervale and ran track at Passaic Valley High School. A computer operator for Blue Cross Blue Shield in Manhattan, he married, had children, and moved to Little Ferry, then to Lodi. He had none of the juvenile history that most serial killers have, Bronsky said. After Cottingham confessed in January 2020 to killing Jacqueline Harp, age 13, of Midland Park, Irene Blaze, 18, of Bogota, and Denise Falaska, 15, of Gloucester, in the late 1960s. He wasn't driven by fantasy like many serial killers. These were impulse-driven crimes, which makes it harder to find the links between them. Authorities finally caught up with him on May 22, 1980, when a maid working at a Hasbrook Heights motel called the cops after hearing a scuffle in a guest room. Cottingham was inside with an 18-year-old sex worker who survived the ordeal. Police arrested him in the parking lot, and he's been imprisoned ever since. But many of his victims weren't so lucky. Cottingham was later convicted of killing another sex worker and stuffing her under a bed at the same motel. He had previously dumped the body of another victim, X-ray technician Mary Ann Carr of Little Ferry, behind that motel in 1975. He was also found guilty in New York of the mutilation murders of 3 sex workers, and in 2010 pleaded guilty to killing Nancy Vogel, A Little Fairy Mother in 1967. Court documents say Cottingham killed Vogel in Montvale, the same town where the North Bergen teens were found. During an interview with a record in NorthJersey.com 5 years ago, Nancy Pryor said the details of August 9, 1974, the night her sister disappeared, have seared themselves into her memory. Her parents, Wanda and James, were not home. Nancy planned to go out, and Marianne had to be home by 10. She was anxious to get back anyway. She was packing to go to the shore, Pryor said. But that never happened. When I came home close to probably midnight, the door opened before I could put my key in, and my mother was standing at the door, and she's like, "Where's your sister?" Pryor said, "Of course." She started panicking. Kelly's family hadn't heard from her either, nor had anyone else. The families held out hope until August 14th, when police found 2 bodies in Montvale. The Pryors heard the news on radio station 1010 WINS. Moments later, detectives knocked on their door. The prosecutor's office said Tuesday that the pair were last seen walking together on Broad Avenue in Ridgefield. Witnesses told police at the time they were trying to hitchhike to the mall and were last seen getting into a car driven by an unknown white male. Their bodies were found 5 days later. Lorraine Kelly was reportedly found with a beaded bracelet and a necklace with the inscription Lorraine and Ricky, a reference to her boyfriend, Ricky Molinaro. The Pryors identified Marianne from a gold cross on a necklace she wore, a gift from her godfather. Then Nancy Pryor and her mom saw the body. My father couldn't. My father had a nervous disability. They only opened the curtain partially. She was covered except for her face because the body was bruised and already starting to decompose. And I said, "That's not my sister." My mother didn't say a word, but they gave us a few more seconds, and in my heart, I knew it was her. I still have that image in my head, and that was 42 years ago. That is something that you can't erase. There's an interesting development out of Indiana, and we haven't covered this case, and we're probably not going to cover the case itself. That is the Delphi murders. And the Delphi murders happened in 2017. And if you know anything about them, if you follow true crime, then you've heard of these murders. And that's the murders Abigail Williams and Liberty German. That's
very sad, very, very sad case.
It really is. They were very young. That was one of the things that stood out to me is it's how young these 2 girls are. Abby
Don't you find
is
it a little odd that Don't you find it a little odd that there's been so little information?
No, because a number of reasons. It's a really small place.
Right.
Like even the county itself, the entire county out there in Indiana, I think it's Carroll County that does this because that's the sheriff that's been talking about it. Even though there's been very little information, it's because there's so few people. There's only those counties only have like 18 to 21,000 people. I don't think in areas like that you end up with a lot of information coming out right away, largely because they're trying to solve the crime. And in this case, they have video of possibly the killer, and they have several sketches have been released, and they have, I think they have some audio. I don't think it's as much as people on the internet think it is, but they've gone through several persons of interest who have never really made their way to suspect. But what has happened there in the Delphi murders is there's a new person of interest. What's so interesting about the person of interest, probably the reason for hiding all the information, I don't think this is a one-off.
Right, because he was committing another crime.
Right. So when I say I don't think this was a one-off, I think if you go through, when they find who committed the Delphi crimes, if you go through his history, I suspect there will be more about that person that will come out where they're either serial rapist or possibly a serial killer. An abductor.
It was pretty brutal because they were taken in broad daylight. Their bodies were found the following day, not exactly where they were, but not too far away, and just left out the open. Now, I guess maybe part of my thinking they haven't really released a lot is because they haven't They haven't said anything about cause of death or, I mean, we know it's homicide, but like we don't know how they were killed. And so maybe that's because it makes sense. So I guess in this case, it's actually like a really good thing that we don't know a lot. It means they're working the case.
Yeah, it does. And so they went missing on February 13th. Their bodies were found February 14th. What has happened there that is so interesting with the person of interest is how he came to light. And that is, there was in a nearby county called Tippecanoe, there was a missing 9-year-old girl on April 19th. She basically had left her house and hadn't been seen. And the police ended up knocking on the door of this person that is now being called a person of interest.
They were talking to neighbors to see if anybody had seen her.
Correct. The Journal and Courier Online has covered this case so far, this new one. What's so interesting is the police knocking on this person of interest door may have saved the life of this 9-year-old girl. The gist of what happened was, okay, let me back up. The suspect's name is James Brian Chadwell. Chadwell had let this little girl in to pet his dogs. He allowed officers to search his home when they knocked on his door. From what the little girl said, she believed that Chadwell was going to kill her. Chadwell had locked this little girl in his basement. She'd been beaten, strangled, and attacked by Chadwell's dog and sexually assaulted, according to paperwork filed by police and prosecutors. This is all from a probable cause affidavit out there. That alone,
it's insane.
I cannot even wrap my head around like how all of this went down.
I wonder how they, so she wasn't dead yet, and she was in his house. So they had to have gotten on it pretty quick.
Yeah, there's some accounts from neighbors that sort of describe different things that were going on. But basically, one of the neighbors said that they saw Chadwell talking to a woman in the alley by his house, and then the police were there. I have a feeling that's going to turn out to be the little girl's mom because she's not identified anywhere, and I wouldn't be identifying the mom or the little girl if that were the case. This guy has a criminal record. His criminal record goes back years. Now, I can't tell from what I've been able to put together that he has any crimes involving children, but he definitely has a criminal record, and he did time in prison in South Dakota. That's not even the interesting part of this for me, by the way. The interesting part is that he is a person of interest in the Delphi murders, which there's a Delphi podcast called Down the Hill that I've listened to some of. I haven't followed that one. That's a really hard case for me because it involves a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old girl, and crimes involving
just a terrible situation.
Yeah, crimes involving murdered children are hard for me. I mean, I'll read about them. It's just not going to be a case that I easily cover. If this guy turns out to be that case, I will definitely go hunting for him. But that's the interesting part, is this guy being named a person of interest. The internet lit up. Reddit lit up. Web sleuths lit up. Everybody has sort of seized on this guy's Facebook profile and everything. And this guy is like a prolific meme poster and shit poster on his Facebook profile. And what's interesting about him, he does not post after February 14th until like mid-March, even though he posts pretty much 24/7 all the rest of the time. So he's going to pop up for me in a number of cases, including there's a couple of murders that I don't know if people are thinking about yet. It's starting to seem like some people are thinking about them. But Elizabeth Collins and Lyric Cook Morrissey, that was a double murder in 2012 out in Iowa. He's going to pop up in that one for me because he has ties to Iowa, to South Dakota, to Illinois, to Indiana. He's definitely one of these people that the internet and all the web sleuths are gonna go after for a while, and I'm interested to see what they come up with because I have now, dove into this rabbit hole about 36 hours ago, I guess, and I shared it with you about halfway through my dive. What's interesting about that dive in addition to the internet lighting up and everybody sort of being on top of him, is his Facebook profile is just chock full of nonsense. He's got pictures removing what looked to me like 22 caliber bullets out of his own body. And, you know, I was going through and I was trying to make heads or tail of it. But the truth is, he's going to have to talk. You're going to have to like track him down because of he lives sort of a transient lifestyle in some ways. And it's really hard to make heads or tails of the way that he's babbling on Facebook. And we all have those people. If you have a Facebook account, you have those people on Facebook that you could watch pretty easily. And in this particular instance, him being, he's officially a person of interest in the Delphi case. And that to me makes him interesting.
Right. What got my attention? If you'll recall, there were two very different looking sketches released. Regard to, I think they tried to get like from the video, like they were trying to put a face on the guy in the video. And then I don't know if there were witnesses that may have seen somebody, but part of intrigue for me was, they're releasing very little information. And here you've got two composite sketches of one suspect, and the composite sketches look nothing alike. Right?
Right.
In my opinion. And so, yeah, there had to have been two accounts of it. But then this guy pops up and his mugshot looks like both of these composite sketches somehow.
Yeah,
and
he has attributes of both sketches, which is crazy.
It's such a unique situation because you've got, and I don't know the source of like where the composite, I don't know exactly where they came from, but I do know there was one released and then a little later on, the other one was released, and my brain couldn't really compute what was happening there because they were still just looking for one suspect, but it was both of these guys. But now it makes sense if it is in fact this guy, because he does look like both of them. And actually, when you sent me the link to this guy, because this just happened like 2 days ago. No, wait.
The cold stuff
like
happened
10 days ago.
Well, the crime happened 10 days ago, but what happened that set all this off is on Monday, they came through and they charged him formally. And I'll just go ahead and say this, and you can go with whatever you want there. He is currently, like in this situation, charged with attempted murder, child molesting, attempted child molesting, kidnapping, criminal confinement, battery resulted in serious bodily injury, and a charge of strangulation. They also filed a sentence enhancement against him, and that sentence enhancement, basically it's called, they call it the bitch. And what that is it's a habitual offender accusation. It is meant to enhance any potential sentence if he is guilty and convicted, etc., or pleads guilty. It adds a lot of time to his sentence. It could add anywhere from 6 to 25 years to his sentence.
I've actually heard of that in the news in a very popular story. Is that something new?
What?
The filing for an enhancement, because
no, it's so
all states have like statutory, what you're going to get for certain crimes. And what you're saying is he's going to get, if he's found guilty, he will get what the statutory limits are, but they're also asking for that additional habitual offender punishment to be added.
It's not new. It used to be called the career criminal, but the depends on like the jurisdiction that he was in. The states have, over the last 20 years, they implemented what used to be called 3 strikes laws. I don't know if you've heard of it that way.
Yeah.
So 3 strikes laws are habitual offender laws. Now, they happen on 3 levels. You can be a habitual misdemeanor offender. That means you consistently commit a domestic violence act or a simple assault. It's a way to enhance that repeat offense to make it a felony. So that's one way they do it. And it's not limited to just domestic violence, but I'm saying like stuff that doesn't quite rise to the level of being charged as a felony. And that's one of the most frequent things they use. There are other things that can come into play there, including DUIs, other types of assault and theft. But if it's a misdemeanor that is repeated, it can become a felony. And that's one version of a 3 strikes law or a habitual offender law. I'm making big air quotes for no reason because no one can see me. Another way is if it's the same type of felony over and over again, like, that can be used to correct behavior is the idea, or to enhance
That's
a
the
sentence.
point, right? So there's got to be factors involved that mimic.
And for the most serious felonies, it's an enhancement for the prosecution to make an argument that the person deserves essentially life in prison. So that's the third version of it.
I just thought it was weird because I've heard of 3 strikes and mandatory minimums and that kind of thing, but I've never heard of a sentence enhancement. And then I've heard it twice, like within a week. It's weird.
It really depends on where you are as to when it came into effect. But the idea for 3 strikes laws, if you go through, I am sure you will find that they originate probably with Joe Biden, honestly. But
back when he was
in the 90s, probably under Clinton. I don't know that it would definitely be under that crime bill, but
no, it's
early 90s.
It's actually earlier. I think it's about late 80s. It's just a little bit. I think I've looked into that actually, and that's a whole different story. But I was just curious. We've kind of gone off on a tangent here, but I was just curious about that. I feel like this is fantastic, and I hope that I'm sure they have evidence because of the way the Delphi murders played out, and they were able to recover the girls quickly. And I don't know if they had the crime scene or they haven't released that information, but hopefully they got some evidence and they can tie this guy to them if he did in fact do it, which of course, if he didn't do it, I find it highly bizarre that both of those composites look like him, because I couldn't figure out how on earth that was going to end up being the same person. And then ta-da, here you go.
Yeah. And as I looked through his Facebook profile and looked at older pictures and stuff, I came to the same conclusion you did. He definitely at different times has looked like both of those composites in the recent years.
Well, even his mugshot looks like both of them, at the same time. It's just, it's weird. And I find that fascinating. And I hope, and I guess if I don't, if it's not him, then I'm just seeing what I want to see, I guess. I don't know.
Well, he has a tattoo that looks suspiciously like one of the girls from the Delphi murders, and that really bothered me. And the other thing about people commenting online about him is, first of all, it's terrible what happened to this 9-year-old girl. It is absolutely horrible. There is no excuse for people to behave that way ever under any circumstances. So regardless of whether he has anything to do with the Delphi murders or not, what he did to that 9-year-old girl, if true, he needs to go ahead and be put away. And that, or just released to the inmates. I don't really care what you do with him.
Because I'm so glad that she was saved.
Right. And the other side of that is I think it's horrible if he did anything to any other children or any other people, particularly when it comes to children. There's this innocence thing that comes into my mind where kids can't really defend themselves against people like that. And I get very angry. But the other thing that bothered me was he's pretty abusive to animals. And plays off like he's not, and that really pissed me off.
Well, yeah. So, in my opinion, and we don't know everything about the Delphi case. We don't know everything about this guy. You've sort of looked into his social media, but in taking his next door neighbor and, she was only gone for 30 minutes before the cops knocked on his door. I mean, golly, I'm glad it wasn't longer. But doesn't that sound like sort of somebody reaching a breaking point and making mistakes?
Absolutely.
Taking your neighbor's kid and...
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that happened in the probable cause hearing was he asked the judge how can he get a psychological evaluation, and she referred him back to his own attorney. And so when he got put in to jail, he was put on a miscellaneous hold right away after this happened. He appears to have been pretty well interrogated for a while. But because of that miscellaneous hold, it was really easy for me to find him. He is a junior, the second, I think. His name, the second. But I was able to go through his criminal record since he's been in Indiana. And once I got it sorted out from James Chadwell the first by date of birth, he is constantly in trouble with the law. What's interesting about that particular thing is, so he goes to prison, he stays in prison for a pretty good long time. But once he gets out of prison, he doesn't seem to have anything terrible until 2019, like he's possibly somewhere else. And in 2019, the smaller charges start to build against him. He ends up evicted in 2020. So he's definitely someone who's suffering different types of stressors. And he had, other types of violence before, particularly battery and assault.
Why do you think he let them search his house?
I think he might have been inebriated. I cannot.
Well, I can believe he was inebriated. I just don't see
why the hell. I mean, okay. So first of all, if we get past why the hell would he do it in the first place? Really? They probably said, "Look, man, if you make us get a warrant, it's just going to get worse." That's probably what happened.
Okay, that's fine. No, and so let me just be clear. I'm glad that he consented and they were able to get the little girl quickly. But it's weird to me that like this cold-blooded murder. I mean, what do you care if they have to get a warrant and it's going to be worse? You've got a little girl locked in the basement.
Okay, look, cold-blooded murder, he may not be a cold-blooded murderer the whole time. Like, that's the thing. Like, that's one of the things that makes people...
so he's probably got problems then.
Well, okay.
I mean, he's got problems.
He has legal problems right now. If you want to say, like, does he or does he not have psychological problems?
No, he does. I mean, he had a little 9-year-old girl locked in his basement. There is absolutely nothing that could come from that would make me say, oh, yeah, he's fine.
I cannot even fathom. Like
he was babysitting? I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously not, because...
He lured her in the home. That's what's being said.
Right. Well, yeah, because he's like, you want to come pet my dog? And then she's like, sure, I imagine. And, she probably thought he was harmless because it's not normal for somebody to take their neighbor. Like, you're going to be one of the very first people looked at.
No, it's sort of like if you go to your neighborhood coffee stand and grab the barista. It's sort of like that.
It is very, well, I'd say the neighbor is even more so because it's more permanent. But yeah, I mean,
this little girl had been out of their sight for 20 or 30 minutes and they called the cops. So it's not the parents' fault.
They knew that there was a problem. They knew immediately. And, good thing too, because I find it very, I just find it weird that he allowed them to search. Maybe he thought they wouldn't think to go in the basement. I don't know. But, one of the things about the girls from the Delphi murder, one of the things about their case made me sad that they didn't. Well, I don't know that they didn't fight back, but the two girls, I feel like together could have overcome this idiot.
Well,
whoever.
Here's an interesting thought, and maybe this is why they haven't released a lot of information. I wonder if dogs were involved. I know Bridge Guy doesn't have a dog in the video that's been released, but
he could be it could be running around. It wouldn't have gone on the bridge. It wasn't stable. I mean, it was stable, but it had holes in it.
I'm just saying, what if that's the case? And, that's a way to get people
because he's down the hill and I'd be like, no, I don't understand why. And that's not to say anything bad about them. I'm just saying I can't even, the way he
They're
sounded, the
13
way
and
he
14
looked.
years old.
I know that. I get it. But to me, I'm going, say, hell no, and, push him off. I hope that they did fight back, and I'm sure that they did the best they could. To me, it just seems like the cojones it takes to get two teenage girls at one time.
Yeah, well, he was in Kokomo, Indiana in July of 2018, and he had gunshot wounds. And I started looking around to see if there were any attempted abductions around that time. He says it was because somebody tried to rob him, but I was wondering, was it because, did he get shot? According to his social media, he did, and he took the bullet out himself, because he didn't go to a hospital, because hospitals have to report gunshot wounds.
Right.
So he didn't want it investigated.
But he's got it all over social media.
Yeah, he put it all over social media. So my point is, I wonder if Kokomo, Indiana, or anywhere nearby had an attempted abduction where someone fired shots. Mm-hmm. And like that's where I would start if I were hunting for this guy, because that's an easy one to sort of track.
Well, the reason why hospitals always have to report gunshot wounds is typically when someone has a gunshot wound, there's a problem that needs to be reported to the authorities.
Yeah.
I know, but I'm just saying, and accidents happen. They do. And that seems so strange to me that he would
allow the cops into his house.
Well, allow the cops into his house and then put on, I haven't looked at his social media, but put on his social media that, he had a bullet in his body.
They're in the same thinking. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
Letting the cops into the house.
Does he not realize that that's how that works? It's just a weird thing, because I understand if you can't say no to the cops that want to search your house. Okay, I get it, and it's like I don't want to say coward, but he went along with them because they, like you said, it's just going to be worse if we have to get a warrant, and I have a bit of a smart mouth sometimes, and I would say, well, go get your warrant. And trust me, I'm never going to have anybody locked in my basement. I just find it really strange. How does that brain operate?
So here's how that works. He did, and depending on when he was paroled, he did 10 years prison time.
What for?
Aggravated assault in South Dakota.
Is DNA required for that?
It doesn't matter. Not exactly. But it wouldn't be compared yet. Here's why. Because South Dakota and Indiana are not the same state. I'm being a smartass. Indiana did not have, until the Delphi murders, Indiana's rules were for convictions only, not arrests. So they would not have been able to do it in the Indiana arrest that he had. And South Dakota, DNA is not linked up the way that people think it's linked up. So
yeah, they need a connection.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but where I'm going with that is the reason that you do stupid shit and the reason that you let the cops search your house is because you're conditioned to react to the cops at that point. Because because
he was in prison, and that's what you're
right.
At.
And here's how I back it up. This is not a serial rapist that's grabbing college girls.
He's grabbing little kids.
Right. And that is a pussy. Excuse me. That is that's a coward.
Well,
that's a coward.
I concur, and yes, anybody.
There's two types of people that do that to children. One is a type that's attracted to children. The other is a type that feels like they can control children.
Everybody can control children if they want to.
Right. It's not a hard crime.
Right. It's not. And it's also good for you that you get off on it. I mean, come on. They're a child. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Absolutely. This is horrible. And that's the part that makes it all stand out to me and makes him a likely candidate. To see when I went through the different stuff related to the Delphi murders, and then I swear I'll get off of this because I know that's not our topic. I just was
It's not even on the list.
No, it's not. It's not even close to anything that we're doing. But here's the.
But it is. I really do want to. I want this case to be solved. I know we haven't covered it, and we probably won't. But it, I want to. I want this case to be solved. Those girls deserve justice.
Well, so the internet went after a guy named Daniel Nations, who was a registered sex offender from Indiana, and he had been threatening people on a trail, apparently, in Colorado. He didn't fit what I thought the Delphi murders guy would probably look like. And then there's this guy, Paul Eder, who killed himself in Indiana, who had, he was wanted for the kidnapping rape of a 26-year-old woman back in 2019, but he killed himself when the police were coming to get him. He didn't fit what I thought would be the Delphi murders.
I wonder if they don't have DNA.
I'm wondering if the DNA is not the killer. You wonder if they don't have DNA of who?
Because when the guy killed himself, I'm remembering. I'm sorry that I interrupted
you're fine.
you. So the guy killed himself, and so if that's what made it click, I was like, well, they could have still seen if it was his DNA.
No, you're talking about the Delphi scene?
Yeah. Because that's been a question.
They haven't said if they do or not.
Okay. Yeah, but they also didn't name that guy as a suspect. He was a person of interest briefly that killed himself. And he may have killed himself because he realized he was a person of interest in something he didn't do.
Absolutely. Well, they had 4 major persons of interest. There was Paul Eder, Daniel Nations, that I just talked about. There's Thomas Bruce, who was a pastor who was charged with fatally shooting one woman and sexually assaulting 2 others. And the key word there is women. The only one I really liked was this guy they had named Charles Eldridge. But when they updated the composite,
it falls back to this guy.
Well, when they updated the composite, in my opinion, that guy didn't match. Like, he matched one of the pictures. And none of these guys matched both of the pictures until now.
Right, because it doesn't seem like it would be the same person.
Right. So this guy, and like there was all sorts of speculation depending on like where you get your true crime from. There were people saying maybe there were 2 suspects and maybe it's this and maybe it's that.
Right. And they weren't saying anything except like we are still looking for this other composite, but now we're looking for both of them, but they're the same person. And so it was strange. And I don't know, I'm sure that they are just the investigators are working on the case, but from, a true crime podcaster's point of view, I'm going, I can't understand what's happening here because there's not enough information and it's weird, but now I get it. Like they just had 2 versions of the same guy and somebody realized that. Now that I realize it can happen, even if it's not this guy, whoever it is going to look like both of those guys.
Yeah, the phenomenon will be true either way. Absolutely. But when they go through, so the other guy looked too old to me. And this is the Eldridge guy. That guy looked too old.
Right, after the second guy, because it's the scruffy guy was the first composite, and the younger looking guy that looks more clean shaven, that's the second one, right?
Right.
It really doesn't seem like it would be the same person.
No, but it could be. And I think what people would find there, and this is just my opinion, and I am speculating a little bit, but I've seen it in action. There's something that happened to people that do a long time in jail. When they're happy, they look their age. When they're not happy, they look much, much older. And it's very rare that they're happy. And I've seen it with a number of people that I've worked with and done different things with over the years that have had serious jail time. I have seen where it affects them in a way that is unusual in how they look in photos. So if you imagine the mind capturing a photo and someone saw this guy beforehand, he would look like the younger guy. But if they saw him afterwards where he's stressed and like all he can think about is going back to jail and trying to get away from the situation, he would look like so the younger guy is the happy version that hasn't done it yet. The older guy is the one that's trying to get away from it all. So that's how they get 2 different pictures out of the same person.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
or a possibility of how they do that. So
That's really
anyways, that's
fascinating.
true crime news for this week, is just that one thing. And if you go out like Web Sleuths, Reddit, all those places, I'm sure that you can find 10,000 different discussions going on about this guy where they say a lot more about this. And
Right. I'm just sort of holding off because I don't, so as much as I like them catching somebody, I don't like to
I know.
um I don't want to accuse somebody
I
who,
wouldn't have
which
even
he's done something terrible anyway.
I wouldn't have
So
mentioned him in connection to Delphi if they hadn't named him as a potential person of interest, which they did this week. But the other crime that he did would have been worth mentioning, because who the hell goes after 9-year-old children?
that's insane. Absolutely insane.
And this is just a friendly reminder not to share the side-by-side comparisons of the man known as Bridge Guy with James Brian Chadwell. And this is at the request of Kelsey German and the Indiana State Police. It can muddy the waters in the investigation. I can get sucked down these standoff rabbit holes, like these standoffs that happen, talking about the one that just happened in Watauga, North Carolina. I get into them and I just want to know what happened. And I realize it's a terrible habit to have. Like
It wastes a lot of
day.
time.
It really does. And this one lasted all day. And you could just sit there and stare at everything and nothing really changes. We still don't even know who it is. We do know the 2 officers were killed, including the canine officer. And that's, always awful. As much
The
as
whole situation is really sad.
Yeah, and as much as I question law enforcement, I don't want them to die doing their job.
Right, because like you said, in this situation, they got a call to do a welfare check because somebody didn't show up for work. And so they were just going to see, so they could report back that everybody had the flu or something. I mean, I
Right.
don't know. I just feel like that would be a terrible turn for the day.
Yeah, it looks like basically officers were arriving for support to try and get those officers out. So the 2 officers for the welfare check, they get shot by someone inside of the home. And then more officers arriving got shot at. One officer was hit, but not hurt because they were wearing protective gear.
It hit him in his helmet.
Apparently that has now ended in a suicide. So that's what, we got to do in the break from James Chadwell there. So we do have some cases that we want to cover in Colorado, but it starts to take a little bit of a different turn. And the first case I want to talk about is Adams County, Colorado Deputy District Attorney Sean May. He was 37 years old when he was shot to death in Denver outside of his West 36th Avenue home at approximately 6:20 p.m. on August 28, 2008. May had been with the DA's office for 7 years, and his wife was pregnant with a baby boy at the time of his murder. To date, I believe his case is still open.
It is. I was curious to know if you knew the rest of the story.
I remember the Tom Clement situation. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, I just didn't know if you knew. I didn't know if you knew.
I didn't know the other part of that. With Tom Clements, that situation I had followed because it was believed to have been. So this is another situation, and that one's going to be in 2013. They're separate, but at one point in time, they were believed to possibly be related. A retired El Paso County Sheriff's detective named Mark Foff, he believed that he could connect Sean May being killed to the 2013 assassination on March 19th of director of the Colorado Department of Corrections assassination, who's Tom Clements. The detective did not work on the Sean May's murder investigation, but he was assigned to the Clements case. And according to him, Evan Ebel, who was a 211 gang member who had died in a shootout with police 2 days after he killed Clements at his home in Monument, Colorado, investigators believed that he had something to do with Sean May's murder. Now, a confidential informant gave up information that there was a hit put out on El Paso County District Attorney Dan May, and that Sean May was simply killed in a case of mistaken identity. Foff believes that Dan May was hesitant to convene a grand jury to go after the other gang members who were involved in Clement's death for fear of retaliation. So none of this is like officially up for release. But the 211 crew, for people who don't know, it is sort of a prison version of a white supremacist gang. Now, they have been linked back to Benjamin Davis. And when he was beaten in a racially motivated attack by a black inmate, so Davis was jumped and beaten with a sock stuffed full of soap bars, but his jaw got broken. So he decided the best thing he could do would be to create a gang in order to protect himself and other white inmates from black and Latino gangs. So the 211 crew, it began as a bunch of bullshit. He just made up a gang. He said, I've got a gang. So the idea was he was going to trick other gangs into thinking that there was this massive white gang protecting white inmates. So the rumor grows and grows and grows. And this is in Denver, Colorado, by the way. As the rumor grows that there's a white gang called the 211 crew, people start asking if they can join the 211 crew. And they want to know, like, how does recruitment happen? How does membership happen? Members of the 211 crew in the late 90s started getting released to the street and it essentially started recruiting. So when they were founded, they had embraced symbols that were traditionally associated with the Irish, Nazi, and Viking cultures. Some members have tattoos of shamrocks, swastikas, other Nazi sigils, Viking horns. They call each other Irishmen, and they are banned from having sex with people who are not white.
Is that a self-imposed ban?
I think it's a purity thing that they created up. It is so weird.
Sounds weird.
The 211 crew is attached to this other crew called the Juggalos, who Juggalo gangs are sort of haphazard in nature, like the Dixie Mafia was, but they're multi-ethnic. They have like lots of people in there. It's so weird when you're having to justify the problems of a criminal organization or gang being biased, I guess. It's very hard to say that. Israel Davis is Ben Davis's dad, and he stated that like when Ben Davis was founding the 211 crew, it really was just like some bullshit he put up for protection, and that Ben Davis actually has two siblings who are mixed race or African American, depending on which version of the story you read. One says it's two black siblings, and another story says it's two mixed race siblings. But 211 crew members have been linked to various racially motivated murders. Their actual stance on race is unclear. They were responsible in 1997 for the murder of Omar Dia, he got off a bus in Denver, Colorado, where there were gang members waiting, and they killed him. And in 2013, Evan Spencer Ebel, who was a 211 crew member, he murdered a local pizza delivery man in order to use his work clothes and like the things related to his job as a disguise. Ebel drove to the home of Colorado Department of Corrections Director Tom Clements, and he was there under the ruse of delivering a pizza. When Clements answered the door, Ebel shot and killed him. And then after murdering Clements at his own home, Ebel rabbited, he took off, and authorities caught up to him in Texas, and they believed that he was on his way to Mexico. He refused to surrender. There was a high-speed chase. There was a shootout. There was a lot of efforts to stop Ebel without killing him, but the pursuit came to an end after Ebel crashed head-on into a gravel truck. He sustained serious injuries from that, and he never regained consciousness, and he died the following day. So we will not get his side of, and that's Evan Ebel's side, of whether or not it was possible that Sean May was killed instead of Dan May, which is bizarre to me.
Some of the I assume associate gang members, or I don't know, I guess it could even be rival gang members, they were the ones that have come forward with the information. And the retired El Paso County detective who was working the case, he found enough information from what he was given to substantiate some of the claims that were being made. And considering it's 13 years later now, and there's never been any motive established for Sean May's assassination in his driveway. He didn't have any known dealings with the gang. However, Dan May, in his capacity as prosecutor, he would have been the one prosecuting some of the crimes that the 211 gang have been involved in. And so it's thought that the hit was essentially put out, it was retaliation for prosecution. And so this retired detective put it together and said, well, it makes way more sense if the 211 gang put out a hit, and then whoever did the hit, they just got the wrong district attorney for some reason. And that's kind of crazy.
It's not kind of crazy. It is horrible.
Well, I was thinking to myself, like, wow, they're geniuses.
Well, so my interactions with some, not related to any of this, but with some gang members, it's funny the amount of shit that people will try and get away with by talking in code in front of other people. So since this is a jail gang, prison gang, these people are generally incarcerated, and I understand it expanded to the streets, but when you're in a situation where there are corrections officers around and you start trying to code things out either on the phone or in person or in notes that where it can't be interpreted, you can really screw some stuff up. If you're telling them to assassinate a lawyer named May who was prosecuting cases and they just go looking for a prosecutor named May, yeah, I could totally see this happening. I could see it being something else, but I could definitely see stupid criminals being involved.
It just seems like I could see it being something else. In fact, it's crazy to think that they just killed the wrong May. But because nothing else has come up, I mean, and he was an officer of the court because I believe he was the deputy district attorney, and that's in Adams County. People would want to know what happened to him. And it would be concerning because, anytime to take out a prosecutor, a gang member, or anybody really, knowing that they're a prosecutor, that they're trying to be vindictive and
it's a retaliation.
It's lawlessness. Okay, so it's when somebody's saying you're not going to prosecute me for, doing bad things and breaking the law, so I'm going to kill you. Like, it's outlaw justice.
Oh yeah, it's wild. It's a wild fucking west when that happens.
It's outlaw injustice, I guess, because it's not justice at all. But I'm saying they have a reasoning for what they're doing.
Yeah, they definitely have an ends to their means there.
The reasoning is, though, that they aren't following, like they're looking at a prosecutor as in a personal way, as opposed to being a representative of the state enforcing the laws of the state. That's all I mean by that. But that kind of thing is what, part of being in civilized society is the respect for the justice system, and that you don't go kill prosecutors because they're just doing their job. And so it violates that sense of order that we have. Not that I think anything about the justice system is fair a lot of the times, it is something at least. And in this case, the fact that he was shot and killed, and it would have, there just happened to be this other district attorney with the same last name as him that would have a more relevant reason for having been shot and killed by a gang. Not that they know Sean May was shot and killed by a gang. They don't know that for sure. But somebody came forward, and the story basically went, yeah, they were supposed to take care of Dan May, and those idiots shot Sean May instead. And so their problem didn't go away. And it was serious enough, the information behind the scenes was serious enough that Evan Ebel, who was the gang member who died
running into the travel truck.
Right. And so he had shot Tom Clements. And it seems like prosecution, the state, was aware that there were more people involved in that ruse and what happened there, but they didn't go after any additional people. And what the former detective was saying, because he feared retaliation. And so it's sort of it seems legit enough to me to take into consideration that they knew the information given to them was probably accurate.
Well, I could tie it together and say if that happened in 2008 and then you've got this thing happening to Clements in 2013, even though there's 5 years difference between the two, you might want to look at somebody who was doing a 5 year stretch or a 10-year stretch or life or something who had been, they were in the process of being prosecuted in 2008, probably sentenced by 2010 or so. And maybe that was the last ditch effort was to go after Clemens, which makes no sense to me. I have no idea why they did that, but they clearly
I don't
felt
know.
like it might make sense to somebody. So the reason that we're looking, first of all, there's still a reward, and that reward has been upped during the pandemic. I think it's $125,000 or so. There's a reward for if you have any information about the murder of Sean May, where you could substantiate this theory. If you could prove any of those things, you might be able to get you some money. Although I am super dubious of rewards. I don't think it's ever actually been included in the stuff we talk about it. But I know my stance on rewards. I think when rewards are made available to solve crimes or find missing people, I think it's a terrible idea.
Right. And I don't actually know the way the rest of the world feels about this, but you don't actually claim the reward. That's very crass and inappropriate. Except, I guess there could be some circumstances where it would be okay, but any sort of kidnapping or murder, you don't actually claim the reward. That's ridiculous.
Right.
I can't believe one of those guys hasn't come forward. Of course, now we're talking 13 years later, so the ones involved, they're quite a bit older now, right?
Yeah.
I would say somebody should go. They could. They're gang members,
they could get if they know something about it. This is actually one of those situations where if they know something about it, they can make themselves a nice little nest egg out of it.
Right. Except you don't really claim the reward, but in this situation, I'm surprised. Okay, that, and I'm not saying it. The whole reason that they offer rewards is because they literally want to pay you for the information you might have about a case. And, they have to validate it, and it's a whole process. And like I said, it's crass to claim rewards in situations like this. If you know something about something, you should go forward without having to be paid. I'm just saying. Now, if you were to happen upon it, I guess that could be different. But, some of these guys knows what happens. And there's a little boy that never met his father, and a woman who lost her husband while she was pregnant with her little boy. And they deserve to have that closure. And it's really, this whole story is really sad.
It really is.
It's just shocking to me, and I'm sure it's shocking to them as well as they raise the reward.
Yeah, that it hasn't enticed anybody to come forward. It has to be sort of frustrating for them. The truth is, I feel like rewards, more times than not, rewards just end up making a big pile of bad information that's really hard to sort through.
That's what I agree with that. And I think sometimes people, if you're looking for a payday in the reward section of criminal cases, people do it though.
I know.
And,
it's crazy.
Ultimately, you either know something about a crime or you don't. And that's really who they're targeting. And you would think a gang member might want to get out of a gang, and that would be a way to do it. And I'm sure that's exactly what they're thinking.
So obviously we're going down the road of unsolved homicides here. And I was looking around Colorado and I was trying to look at the cities and sort of see what the cities looked like. And then I was going to do some comparisons a little later on to some of the areas that are a little more out there space-wise geographically in southern Colorado. So moving from Sean May, now that's definite. That Sean May's death is definitely in a city area. It's like on his doorstep. And this guy's, prosecuting a pretty major crime. In Colorado Springs, as of 2008, Colorado Springs investigators pointed out that they were 20% higher that year than the national rate of success. They were running at a solve rate of about 80% of their homicide. I thought that was really interesting because I was comparing it to Denver. Denver usually solves right at 60% of its total homicide cases. They have been running down for like over a decade now these homeless homicides, which that's sort of shocking to me. It's actually shocking to me that people survive the circumstances and the conditions in Colorado and then die from homicides. There's at this point in time, there's over 40, but the time that I sort of pulled up and looked at, there were 39 homeless people who had died by homicide in Denver in about a 10-year period. A dozen of those cases remain unsolved. So 12 out of 39 cases would be give or take 30%. Denver typically solves right at 60%. So solving that many of those cases is just sort of interesting to me. It doesn't really relate to everything else we're doing in Colorado, but I was curious. My understanding, and I've said before, I come from a crime analyst standpoint. My understanding has always been that most of the areas I've looked at, North Carolina, California, New York, Washington, Oregon, homeless homicides have a much higher unsolved rate.
It actually, the numbers that we were given from what we were looking at, it actually showed that homeless people's homicide with just that parameter, 70% solve rate. And so
In Colorado.
In Denver, Colorado.
Right.
Because of that, it's actually they're getting solved more. But one thing that I considered was, we're talking about a 10-year span of time. So that's different than if you're just looking at annual statistics. It does seem like it's kind of on par, but it seemed like some of the research we were doing was indicating that homeless people, I think in general, are considered to be part of an underserved population. As far as it's nearly impossible to curb it, to get everybody off the streets. Of course, they're underserved. And so when you have that in the back of your head, and then you add to it the possibility of, them being murdered, it just makes it like a little bit, it makes it sadder, I guess, or I don't know. It just, that factor being the fact that they're homeless. And I can't remember what I kept reading, but the way that they said it was awkward to me, experiencing homelessness. I felt like they were going out of their way to make it like not a thing that it absolutely is. It does seem like the numbers are right on tap, though.
I think the reason that like this comes up for me is I've been searching so much in Colorado, and then Nomad Land, which is about being houseless but not homeless necessarily. Nomad Land won several Oscars, and I believe that my search algorithms are skewed. I am so serious because I keep getting information about homeless murders in Colorado, and I haven't searched any murders that I felt like were transient people or homeless people. I did go back through and check one of my iPads, and I did see where I'd been looking in NamUs through quite a few cases where people like they sort of end in circumstances where they may be living in this area and they may be homeless. So I don't know why it suddenly skewed to that, but I thought when it popped up, I was like, okay, I'm going to include this with the rest of what I'm doing here because it's so interesting to me that they have a 70% solve rate for a decade of homeless murders in Denver, Colorado. Denver is really sort of a strange anomaly in Colorado in some ways. I wanted to hit on like different cities, and I wanted to hit on different unsolved homicides. And I threw some in there that I'm sure you looked at more like, what is he talking about? Susan Becker she's been one that has always bothered me because her body was found in Boulder Canyon. And the gist of her story is Susan Becker was 20 years old. She had graduated from Boulder High School in 1979. She was working at this little Good Earth store. So it's like herbs and oils and incense, and like it's just this cute little store that was off 18th and Pearl in Boulder, Colorado. Her brother David said that she had a really good sense of humor. She loved her cats, and that she enjoyed going into the mountains. The last time anybody saw Susan alive was June 19th of 1982. She had been living in Boulder, but was staying with a friend. Her body was found in Boulder Canyon on July 1st of 1982, several weeks later. She died from a knife wound to the neck. She had also worked as a packager at the Pearl Street Market there, right down from the Good store. What's interesting about her case is it's the first case that is linked to someone that Colorado authorities sort of go, we think we had a serial killer on our hands. A man convicted of killing his teenage sister-in-law in Illinois is also suspected of killing a 20-year-old woman in Colorado in 1982. The FBI investigated whether he was involved in other deaths as a serial killer, according to Boulder County Sheriff's official. The suspect, John Agrew, died in 2009 after an accidental overdose. Depending on where you read, it's either attributed to prescription medication or alcohol or both. So a year later, Larimer County Sheriff's officials in Colorado said the DNA evidence linked Agrew to the 1982 death of his 94-year-old neighbor, Orma Smith, whose body was found in a stream near Estes Park. On Thursday, Boulder County Sheriff's officials said that if Agrew was still alive, prosecutors would likely pursue murder charges against him in another 1982 slaying. That is the case of 20-year-old Susan Becker, Boulder County. A friend last saw Susan in Boulder on June 20th, 1982. She had 13 stab wounds to her torso and neck when she was found in a ravine by fishermen on July 1st, 1982. Detectives learned that Agrew had hiked in the area where Becker's body was found, but they never had enough evidence to tie him to the slaying. Agrew was convicted of killing his 14-year-old sister-in-law, Suzanne Marion, in Illinois in 1966 after he was encouraged to confess to the sheriff there. He had moved to Boulder after he was paroled in 1982, and he later moved to nearby Longmont. On July 9th, 1982, a little more than a week after Becker's body was found, Orma Smith's body was found south of Estes Park in northern Colorado. On July 15, 1982, Agrew attempted to abduct a woman at knife point on the University of Colorado campus in Boulder. He was convicted and sentenced. Then he was returned to Illinois to serve the rest of his sentence for killing his sister-in-law because his parole had been revoked after the Colorado conviction. After his death in 2009, relatives found women's purses and jewelry in his home, along with news articles about the attempted Colorado abduction and the homicides of Smith and Becker. Larimer County Sheriff's officials said in 2010 that technology advances allow them to tie DNA evidence in Smith's death to Agrew, and Boulder County investigators then took another look at Becker's death. There were no usable DNA samples from Becker's death. However, Suzanne Marino, Susan Becker, and Orma Smith had all died of multiple stab wounds in the same areas of the body. They were all found in or near mountain streams. So Boulder County Sheriff's officials said they consider the investigation into Becker's death to be closed. And I worry about cases like this because I worry about making them more than they are. And I worry about like things sort of getting lost and closed just because there was a suspect.
He killed Susan Marion, and he was convicted of that in 1966. And he was sentenced to serve 20 to 50 years, but he was released after 16 years. He killed his sister-in-law, and then he kills Susan Becker, and then he kills his 94-year-old neighbor. And then when he's attacking a University of Colorado 26-year-old female student, he is probably trying to take her at knife point, and he's arrested. And then he's convicted for that. So I was going to say, like, what else do you think this dude's been up to? But then I realized, okay, so he was in jail from 1966 for 16 years. So that actually puts that right at 1982, right?
He gets out and goes on a spree.
Right. So he does those three, and then so for the attempted abduction, he only serves 2 years, because in 1984, having been paroled for the murder of his sister-in-law after serving 16 years, he goes to Colorado, and it looks like pretty much immediately starts murdering women. Okay, then he's caught there it's from July 1st until July 15th. He's on this spree that he's doing, and his last attempt at he ended up being arrested. And so he serves 2 years for attempted abduction, but they find out that he violated his parole by being in Colorado. I assume he wasn't supposed to leave Illinois. And so they sent him back, and he served his sentence.
He comes back up again later, and I had been interested in him for a number of things. In that time period, the 70s and 80s, there were only 3 active serial killers that have ever been sort of disclosed to have been active like that in Colorado. So we have Ted Bundy, who was active there briefly. We have John. He is some level of serial killer. Whether he did more, it seems kind of unlikely based on how much time he spent in jail.
I was going to say, when would he have done more? It seems like he did he would have been a disaster.
Right, and we're going to talk about the other serial killer a little bit later on, and that's a guy named Vincent Groves. And Vincent Groves is very, very different. His victim counts remain unknown, but the situations where there's a couple things going on with him. One is that he was only active, from what we can tell, from 1978 to 1988, and he actually died after he had been apprehended in 1988. He died in 1996, and he died of pretty much natural-ish causes. What's interesting about him is he was apparently killing prostitutes, and he killed a prostitute that was able to be linked back to him. But he comes back up. Vincent's not the one that we're doing today. He was a black guy, so that's different.
Right. But do you think that he is? I think he's another that's kind of like Psycho, where he just loses his temper. I can totally see somebody killing their sister-in-law. Yeah. He, the last moments of her life were like,
it's awful.
Woman. She lived 94 years and then got drugged 26 miles away by this dipshit. Exactly. It's kind of, I don't think we're gonna, I don't think there's gonna be a whole lot more to this story, but now I'm sort of interested in looking, because I need to find where he got out and where he was, and I don't think it was a very long time, but there may be another.
It could be. He died in 2009, so the window we'd be looking at is like what happened to him between the parole violation and 2009 when he died. So there was an interesting component that sort of wrapped up John Agru for now, and Meg may come back to it. There's an article from May 19, 1976, that killer who escaped last week who gave sister kidney is recaptured. A convicted killer who escaped from the University of Illinois hospital after donating a kidney to save his sister's life was recaptured Tuesday while driving a stolen car in Central City, Nebraska. John Agru, 28, was convicted of killing his sister-in-law in 1966, eluded a guard, and escaped a week ago. Central City Police said they saw Agru driving a car reported stolen an hour earlier from the parking lot of the Dodge County Post Office, about 70 miles from Central City. According to Dodge County's Chief Deputy Sheriff Floyd Small, Agru allegedly stole the car after observing the woman pull up in front of the post office and run in to mail a letter. On the front seat of the car, Small said, the woman had left her purse and a certified check for $10,000 she was going to deposit in a bank. Both the purse and the check were recovered intact. Agru had been transferred to University of Illinois Hospital from the Joliet Correctional Center on April 30th for the operation to aid his ailing sister Kathleen, who was 30. Police said that he was first discovered missing at 9 p.m. last Tuesday from his room on the 6th floor of the hospital by Sidney Lowry, a guard from the Correctional Center. Agru underwent surgery on May 4th, and his sister had been in the hospital awaiting the operation since last December. Her life had been maintained by an artificial kidney machine. Agru was serving a 20 to 50-year sentence for the fatal stabbing of Suzanne Marino, 15, his sister-in-law. He was supposed to be eligible for parole on January the 13th. So that sort of explains why he died as well, having given up one of his kidneys. That's really interesting.
I'm actually looking at the time leading up to Susan Becker. There's a trail. I mean, he went like July 1st, July 9th, July 15th. So I'm saying when did he get out? And so he's got to go from Illinois to Colorado. So who died in
between June 19th is Susan Becker's death, or thought to be her death. She was found on July 1st, and then July 9th is the day that Orma. That's
I think that we should see what
Well,
other
that's what I was going to
deaths
say. You have to
are
be
around
careful
then.
because Vincent Groves is active at the same time, and it's a similar situation, although he wasn't as random. He spent time in jail for some of his murders, got out on parole, and then went back to, being a murderer, because that's what murderers do, is they murder.
Right. And so that is one attribute I will give John. He did go back to murdering, but he was probably even madder at the world when he got out of jail for killing his sister-in-law. So I stick by, I bet this guy lost
Yeah.
his temper.
And so there was, in the middle of all these unsolved murders here that weren't temper losing people, I guess, does Bundy count as a temper losing person?
No, he's a serial killer. No, because he went and okay, so here's the difference. Okay. When you are Ted Bundy, you are taking women specifically to kill them. Okay, I'm saying that sort of like with Psycho, in the course of doing business, which would be living your life, he has interactions with people that cause him to, haul off and slap somebody, and then it just goes downhill from there. But I don't feel like he ever I feel like people who snap, they're not going, I'm gonna go kill somebody. Ted Bundy said that to himself all the time, I'm sure. I'm gonna go, who do I want to kill today? That kind of thing. But people who just can't control themselves are a whole different breed. And I mean, you have to know what it feels like to sort of just be so enraged at something that you lose control
Oh, yeah.
momentarily, right? Except that as you become an adult, most people, as you grow and you're bigger and stronger, you control yourself and you say, oh, I feel that rage rising, and you may want to lash out, but you don't, because you're a grown up. And it's like these people didn't do that. They didn't learn the skill of remaining calm. Instead, it escalates quickly. So I think that with his neighbor, his 94-year-old neighbor that he killed, I think that he probably wanted something from her. And I don't even mean he was trying to attack her. I mean he was probably just trying to get money from her. I don't know what happened, but I'm just saying it probably escalated from a completely normal encounter. Now, the one thing I say all that, but then of course he ended up being arrested because he took someone by knife point. So that's, getting into a different territory there. But I imagine he got, a thrill out of his snap kills, right? I don't know about Susan Becker. I don't know how they would have crossed paths, but she's the first in that area, it seemed like, until we look and maybe find somebody else. But you don't stalk your sister-in-law. You don't stalk your neighbor. It's weird when you do that. We spoke about recently with a little girl who, was found in the basement of her neighbor's house. And so it is a different kind of person. Now, it seems like he would have probably sped on up and plateaued as a all-out serial killer, because this was 3 victims in a month. That's a lot. The third one was not killed, but I am interested to see the path along where he would have been between getting out and
Well, that looks like
where he was
Illinois down to
arrested.
Colorado.
Well, and I don't know if you saw or not, but you said, so yeah, Ted Bundy, I would say Ted Bundy is, given all of his circumstances, which that includes his production in court and leading up to his execution, everything about Ted Bundy, he was a very quote special end quote person. He I feel like that combination probably, it would be really hard to come by somebody else like him. Did you see on for this week the where one of his victims was on the list?
That's why I was bringing him up. That's why I was segueing into the next victim.
Okay. Yeah, no, I didn't know if you, it's not in order, so I wasn't sure if you
well,
saw
I just
that.
wanted to talk about her briefly, and I realized I'm sort of getting the chronology off. Jesus, my brain's just that. I was just trying to get my chronology set up, but I realized that like I had her out of order when I sent to you. So, anyways, what I wanted to talk about related to her was whether or not there might have been killers that were missed in that group. So I named 3 people, and I'm curious if of those 3 people were there more. And I can never remember. So I think Vincent Groves and I think Ted Bundy. When I think of serial killers from that time in Colorado, I'm sure that there was more going on that we don't know about yet. But
Right. Bundy would have been in jail by 82.
I'm just saying, in the 70s and the early 80s, I know
Right.
we're not crossing the streams necessarily here, but I wanted to know, is Shelley Robertson an official Bundy victim or not? And I can't find that
She's
information,
not.
but it seems like you came to the same conclusion.
She's not an official victim. And actually, I only look like in a couple places, so I didn't look everywhere. And I actually don't know what the authority on that is. So it was really hard to kind of substantiate it. What I do know is Clear Creek County investigator Bob Denning went to Salt Lake City to interview Ted Bundy while he was in jail for his kidnapping of Carol Durant. And he asked Bundy about Shelley Robertson's case. Shelley had disappeared without a trace on Monday, June 29th in 1975. What Bundy is reported to have replied, "I don't want to talk about that." And investigator Bob Denning said he was 99% sure that Shelley's killer is Ted Bundy. So, like I said, I don't know what the authority on that is. 7 weeks after she disappeared on June 29th, 1975, her body was found.
She was in the mine
And
shaft.
it was found in a
Yeah, I
mine shaft
remember this
near
one. I just didn't
Georgetown,
know
right?
it was like Bundy.
And so, well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's him or not. The investigator working the case, it appears, was sure it was Bundy, and it appears stopped working on the case because it was Bundy. Other things that I read about the case, she certainly fit his profile. That's where I feel like a lot of these, it's bothersome because she did fit his profile, but I was actually looking at trying to find more pictures of her because to me her hair wasn't long enough. And I know that's sort of a
No, I do
ridiculous
that
thing to
too.
bring
I do a
up,
lot of
but
just in case stuff.
well, because when I was looking, it was my opinion the picture that was wide, and she was only missing for 7 weeks, and then I think her body was randomly found in the mine shaft, and so it wasn't this like ongoing forever type missing persons case. That is pretty long. It's almost 2 months. Looking at the picture, my initial response is her hair's not long enough for her to have been a Bundy victim. I defer to the investigator's opinion here, but it sounds like that I don't want to talk about it. It doesn't really fit with Shelley Robertson's profile. So I don't know which category she would have fallen in for him to have said that. Yeah, but Shelley was 23, so she wasn't a kid. I don't feel like Bundy knew her in any way. So, I just.
Was she too close to family
so
somehow?
No, I don't think so. I feel like that connection would have been made especially since there's an investigator working
Well,
on it.
he wasn't a murderer yet. So I don't know if the rules apply.
No, he was a murderer. He
wasn't convicted of it. He wasn't in a position I think the rules apply later. I don't know that they applied here. This was when he was a kidnapping suspect.
I don't even know how accurate. I understand that, but they were already looking at him for murder, and to me, and I don't know, but to me this sounds like somebody cobbled something together, and it could have gotten a case off somebody's desk. And like I said, to me, Shelley didn't have long enough hair to be Bundy's victim. I am not going to argue anything with anybody about any of it because I don't know for certain. The investigator on the case said he was 99% sure. it doesn't make sense that Bundy wouldn't have wanted to talk about Shelley, except what you said as far as him not being charged with murder yet. It seems weird to me that an investigator would have gone all that way to talk with him about a murder if it was already at a point, unless it was already at a point
Well,
where they knew he had killed.
They thought he was Ted at that point from Seattle, but they didn't know that they didn't know the depth of what was going on.
It sounds like somebody they inserted what was happening towards the end of Bundy's life before he was executed. They inserted that situation into the Salt Lake City situation, and he wasn't acting the same way at that point in time. So it I don't know how accurate it is, and it looks like it's like third party hearsay, written over again. So I don't know, but you know what, I might just look and see.
Well, we could go look at that one. We got a couple more cases I want to talk about
now before I can say for sure.
This is one of those that she just comes up in the course of Colorado. She's an interesting unsolved murder, and we need to go back and take a look at her.
The problem is, it's nothing about her, but if she's not Ted Bundy's victim, somebody's getting away with her murder.
Exactly. That's what all of these come down to for me, and that's why they get a mention if they're still unsolved. Mm-hmm. And not all of these that we looked at are necessarily unsolved, but Shelley's case it's a pretty sad one. Then we have an Army murder, and this is an ex-Carson soldier from Fort Carson. This is a guy named Joseph Barker. Joseph Barker, his case ends up getting closed without much resolution at all. His case was interesting to me for a number of reasons. It's definitely one of those cases that it gets talked about a little bit here and there, and it doesn't really, there's not much to the story because of how complicated the story is. Joseph Eric Barker was a soldier who was stationed at Fort Carson. He served the country in the beginning of the Iraq War. Joseph Eric Barker was born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was the oldest of 3 children. And his mom says that he was a mischievous boy who liked to test his limits, and sometimes he got into trouble. He struggled in school. 9/11 happened, and he wanted to do something that made a difference. So Joseph enlisted in the Army, and he was shipped off to Iraq with the 3rd Brigade Combat Team from Fort Carson. After his tour, he jumped into a marriage that didn't necessarily work out, and he was honorably discharged in 2005 for chronic back pain. His mother says he came home to Tulsa. He got a job, and he was getting himself together until the phone rang. Some of the guys that he had deployed with to Iraq were calling him. They invited him to Fort Carson to hang out until they left on their second tour. She says they were calling a lot, and it was insistent. She had a bad feeling about it and didn't want him to go. But he did. In late 2005, he left and went down to Colorado. He called home on Christmas Eve, worried that something bad was going to happen to his mom or his younger siblings. He was just panicked, and his mom told him to calm down, that everything was okay. But this is the last time that she ever talked to him. She called several times, and she was told that he was busy. Then on February 7th, 2006, he and other soldiers were in Colorado Springs. Surveillance video at a Walmart there shows him exchanging words with people in another vehicle. He had drinks with a buddy on post, and he went back to the barracks to sleep. And the next morning, he was seen being led by unidentified people to a dark SUV. Linda, his mom, says that the FBI had called her and said that he was missing. On February 21st, they said that Joseph had run off to Mexico. 5 hours later, she learned that his body had been found inside a sewage tank on the base. So this is February 21st of 2006. They know that he was put into the sewage tank, but all the answers were not there. So his mom kept looking for a long time. She's been looking for what happened to Joseph. Linda believes that some of those guys that he had deployed with stripped Joseph down and threw him into the tank while he was still alive. And she thinks that it was over a girl. She says that he had been warned the day before he disappeared about messing with this girl. So the autopsy on Joseph couldn't determine a cause or a manner of death. It could only determine that he was not stabbed or shot. The military officially believes that his death is drug-related, but they haven't said it in exactly that manner. This was
Well, that's actually, I was thinking like the reason they sort of closed it without saying without solving it, was because they'd come to a conclusion that he had somehow accidentally ended up there himself.
Well, that's sort of what I thought as well. I don't necessarily think this is part of some serial killing. It sort of sounds like it's either drug related from the cops' perspective. It's either drug related or it's a situation where they believe that he was ostensibly part of a revenge killing of some kind.
Right. I hadn't heard that he had been threatened just prior. It seems like that could be it could be coincidence, but there's hardly ever coincidence involved in true crime. But it seems like that would be really easy to go one way or the other on it, as opposed to investigating it for 7 years and then closing it without resolution. Now, I imagine because his body was in a pipe of the sewage treatment plant.
Yeah.
That and it could have been there for days. I imagine there's no evidence on his body.
No, there's not going to be. The body's going to be in really poor condition under those circumstances, just due to the chemical exposure.
Right, that's what I was thinking, because it's wet down there, right?
Yeah, it was really fast how everything happened there. It was less than 2 weeks, and he definitely could have been in there pretty much the whole time. But this guy ends up on the list because one, it's an unsolved murder. And the other reason that it ends up on the list is because it's a sewage treatment plant and it's related to the U.S. Army. And that always makes me think of nonsense related to Israel Keys. I'm not saying this is his thing. I'm just saying like that's like what pops into my head.
Well, sure.
And any time that I can't find, Israel Keys on a timeline somewhere, I sort of start going, okay, well, what does that look like? And, is that something I should be looking at? So I put all of those cases in here. Now, with Keys in this instance, this is around the time that Keys was having trouble with all of those ferry receipts that I never understood. The day that Barker's body is found at Fort Carson, and the FBI reaches out and says to his mom that his body is found, and they start off saying that they believe maybe he ran off to Mexico. Right.
Did they have 2 files on their desk that day? And what happened? How do you think somebody ran off to Mexico and tell them that they found his body?
They just got a bullshit story is all. And I don't know why the FBI was calling on a military base anyways. That's not FBI territory. Weirdly.
Well, he wasn't a soldier there. He was just visiting.
Right. So that's probably how CID gets them involved. That stood out in my mind. I put him in here.
Okay, and I can buy that. Under the rec. I don't think Keys had anything to do with this guy. But there are elements of it that, may make you think of it. And, I don't actually know what it means, how one might end up in a pipe of a sewage treatment plant or whatever.
Well, he did have drugs in his system. The mom says...
That's what I mean. Just so that alone, nothing against him. It's just if you've got, and it doesn't, I don't know how much he had in his system, but so, if you've got cocaine in your system, you probably snorted it. That's something you've got to do yourself. It's not like he was roofied or something. And so having, done cocaine, All I'm saying is that ups the chances of ending up somewhere you might not have ended up otherwise. But like I said, I don't know how that works. I don't know if there was a plausible way he could have ended up in a sewage treatment pipe on his own. I would be very disappointed, not surprised, but disappointed if they investigated this case for 7 years and they did it, and the best they could do was close it unsolved. I think, and I don't know that this is the case, but we've talked about it before on the show about how investigators can't seem to bring themselves to, they're like really passive aggressive and trying to tell mothers like that they're, you know, that their child committed suicide, or that, you know, their missing child is dead or whatever. And that's what that kind of, this sounds like to me. It sounds like they should be
Well,
more direct.
they closed this case. It's classified as a closed case, but it's classified as closed, unsolved, circumstances unknown. What's really sad about it for me is that it happened on a U.S. military installation. There were plenty of people around. It's at Fort Carson. There should have been a way for them to find some evidence of what had happened to this guy if there wasn't some kind of little cover up, or if they weren't. And I'm not saying they're covering up a murder, but people might cover up that they like had drug dealers on the base, or that they did this, that, or the other. It feels like they think he did something to end up in there on his own because they closed it out and they didn't investigate the homicide and take it a little more seriously.
Right. And so the only part of that, I mean, there was the threat or whatever, and then he was supposedly being led away and, I mean, put into a dark colored vehicle.
Dark SUV.
And so, you know, that we're talking about a grown man here. I have a lot of trouble with grown men being like forced to do things that, you know, they don't want to do, like not having any sort of self-defense. Does that make sense? I feel like, you know, that this
I agree with
kind
you.
of guy would be your last target. I don't know though, because, you know, he was out of the military, but he was still young enough to be, I would say, you know, I don't feel like anybody kidnapped him, which is what it seems like that statement is alluding to, that he was led to a dark colored SUV. That was the last time.
Well, they make it sound kind of like drug related or gang related or something in the way that it's described.
Well, and I guess that could be, but you know, I don't know. Did they give him? Did they give him cocaine before they killed him? Like, it's just weird.
I mean, you can inject someone with cocaine. It's kind of a waste of fucking time. Like, seriously, it's a waste of time to inject someone with cocaine. People smoke it. People snort it.
See them sharing their cocaine line or whatever with the guy they're about to kill. That's weird. And I don't know how much was in his system. And you know, there's not a lot of information as far as that goes. But
I still think this is something the FBI should investigate. As here's how I would do this. And I'm going to say this because I like shit like this, but also because it looks to me like they've investigated a lot of different leads. Okay. So I'm just going to say this version. I would investigate keys for this. Cocaine, Army, the combat brigade has been deployed in a zone where it wouldn't be at the same time, but where in the years prior, people like Keys would be. I'm saying if you go down that path, and I totally understand it's unlikely that it's going to turn out to be Israel Keys, but you will probably find another version of Israel Keys here, because that's weird for someone to end up in a sewage treatment plant. That is a bizarre place to put a body.
Right, but it's not a bizarre place for somebody to fall.
Right, and that's the other thing. See, there you go, dragging me back down to being like totally rational and logical about this instead of speculating my nonsense. I like my nonsense, but you're right. It would be a weird place for someone to store a body, but it would not be a super weird place for someone to have an accident. I don't know. It's still, you know, there's a couple of homicides on that base that they've never solved. And it's been very interesting to sort of read through stuff about Fort Carson. Ultimately, this guy does not end up on my list of victims of a serial killer. But that is a fascinating case. And like
when the only thing I could think while I was reading it was, Jesus, I wish that this family got some closure on this.
Well, I
This is the
honestly,
U.S. Army and the FBI.
okay, and so what I'm saying is, I feel like they are giving closure. It's
I
just
know.
not being interpreted as closure. And
Well, then they shouldn't call it a homicide anymore.
well, I don't know. I mean,
They should say death by misadventure or suicide or whatever.
well, I don't know who can actually change that or whatever. There's a lot of red tape involved. Like, I can only imagine what it would be like to be somebody at the other end of this that's lost someone and having to deal with all that bullshit red tape. I mean, it'd be really hard.
Instead, they keep raising they've raised the reward amount.
No, they actually rescinded it when the case was closed. They rescinded it.
Oh, they did rescind it.
There is
Okay,
no
sorry
longer a reward, and the mom was disappointed in that. From my understanding, she felt like that it was basically taking what little incentive there was for anybody to talk. I mean, if they haven't talked in 7 years, I don't think they're going to.
No. And most of those people, like military bases, are so transient in that regard too. You got a whole new group of people.
Yeah. And, I would love to say, oh, yeah, it's Keith. It's just, it would line up just too well.
Well, you put another one in here. This one's interesting. This is Mark Francis. Mark Francis grew up and attended school in Clear Creek County. When he was 15, he moved to Leadville, Colorado. He was an avid outdoorsman. His friends called him Mountain Man. Mark worked in construction as a frame carpenter. He was a quick learner, he was creative and smart, and he built log furniture and was a self-taught mechanic. He was naturally athletic, a fearless snowboarder, a gonzo wakeboarder, and a slalom water skier. I'm not 100% sure what a gonzo wakeboarder is. I assume it means that he's sort of a daredevil, doing things on a wakeboard behind a boat, standing up like you would do on a skateboard. So Mark was a mountain biker and a rock hound. He loved Lake Powell and its sunsets. He had few possessions other than his Toyota four-wheel drive pickup truck and what he could carry with him. He had been staying at his sister Stephanie's until the end of February. He left to go to Leadville to make some money. But when he didn't show up for his 24th birthday on March 7th, his family became worried. His truck was found on March the 5th. Mark's body was found March 19th in a remote area north of Idaho Springs. He was near a cell phone tower, and that cell phone tower was serviced every 2 weeks. He had been shot, and as of April 2004, there were 4 men who were alleged to have been involved with this murder.
Do you know about this case?
A little bit about it. Do you?
I do.
Well, you take the other side of it.
Well, it's actually, it's very, it's sad, but it's also really senseless, and it actually made me feel really bad for sort of everyone involved. But Mark's body has been found, and 4 guys in jail. So a guy named Brent McKellop, who was 31, he was convicted of first-degree murder, and that's of Mark Francis, in 2006. That conviction was overturned in 2009. Then I don't know if he was retried or if it was pleaded out, but he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole again in 2010. And so this sentence comes from, on February 28th, 2002, Zach McKellop, who is Brent McKellop's cousin, lured his best friend, who was Mark Francis, to a location just off the precipitous mountain road west of Denver at the behest of his cousin Brent and another friend of theirs, Justin Ria. The trio had decided they would stage a series of home invasions, realizing that it might be necessary to kill the occupants of the homes in these robberies should things go awry. Brent decided to find a target to practice on. Mark Francis was that unfortunate target. And on February 28th, an inebriated Mark Francis played a game of hide and seek among the pine trees with Brent McKellop. before Brent pulled a 9mm handgun and shot Mark. When Mark realized what was happening, he shouted for Brent to stop, but Brent shot him 3 more times before he retrieved another clip of 15 bullets and fired them into Francis at point blank range. Weeks after Francis was killed, the group made its first home invasion, barging into the home of an elderly couple on Lookout Mountain in Jefferson County and robbing them at gunpoint. The couple could not come up with enough cash to satisfy the group's objective. And so Brent McKillop told the couple he would send somebody back the next day to get more money. The next day, his cousin Zach McKillop and Troy Santarelli went back to the home to collect, and the Jefferson County sheriffs were waiting for them. Zach, Troy, and Justin told the investigators what had happened in Mark Francis's death, and they agreed to testify against Brent. In addition to the first-degree murder charges, he was convicted of 2 counts of providing a handgun to a juvenile and 1 count of auto theft for a 12-year sentence that runs at the same time as his life in prison without parole.
What the fuck is wrong with
That's
people?
exactly so what I was saying is feeling bad. So the 2 charges of providing a handgun to a juvenile, it seems to me like maybe these kids were underage, at least a couple of them. But what the heck? Who lures who?
Well, I couldn't figure out how this all got into the pile of unsolved murders at first. And then I realized that some of what we were reading was older and there was new information. This is the worst.
This is, there's nothing unsolved about this. It's just, we're just talking about a really terrible case that...
I don't feel bad for Brent. I feel bad for everybody else.
Well, I do feel a little bad for him. Not that he's in jail, but that he lived some sort of life that made him think that he wanted to do home invasions. And before that, he should practice on his cousin's best friend on how to kill somebody. How do you end up like that?
I have no idea. That is so awful in so many ways.
And
it's really, really terrible.
That poor guy. And I mean, with friends like that, who needs enemies?
No kidding. You don't have any. That's just, oh my God. I couldn't figure out, I honestly couldn't figure out what the hell was happening there. I read about it.
Well, that's why I wanted to tell it, because I realized it's confusing at first. And because it's actually, I think it just right on its face is hard for a normal brain to process, right? What is happening here? And essentially what we were seeing was sort of the process. The 3 guys who weren't Brent, that was Zach, Troy, and Justin, they all testified against Brent. And it doesn't talk about, so they were being held in jail in 2004. But by the time he was convicted, 3 of the 4 were testifying against Brent. And it seems to me like Brent was the mastermind behind, the home invasions, practicing killing somebody on Mark Francis. I'm glad that guy's locked up, because
there's no telling what's going to happen to that dude.
That's a special kind of special. But he did, he was convicted, and then his conviction was overturned, and then either he was retried or he pleaded out. And so he's going to be...
As quick as that happened, I think that's a plea
That's what
deal.
I thought too. I couldn't find any information about another trial, so I think that he just pleaded out, and I don't know why the conviction was overturned or anything, but I didn't look that deep into it. I was so
It's hard to read.
Well, yeah, the whole situation is, and I looked through so many things, and that's why I was like, do you know about this case? Because it's really important that you know before you start. Because it's crazy. It's a crazy case. It's a really, really terrible case. It makes me very sad. But yeah, so that happened. And there's nothing to that except it's a horrible murder that occurred in Colorado. And you have to wonder now, because the innocent, and I say that with big, gigantic air quotes, the innocence of saying, I need to know what it's going to be like to kill somebody in my home invasion robberies, it makes me think, well, he probably didn't do anything before that.
Well, he certainly hadn't killed anybody before that, because that was his
And so,
trial.
and then it seems like he wasn't out for very long after he committed the murder. So I guess what I'm getting at is I don't think this guy is, I think this is actually probably a serial killer that got stopped.
Yeah.
Essentially. So in some ways, I guess we can look at Mark Francis's death as him being a hero for putting this guy away. I mean, it's really terrible.
Yeah, it is really terrible. It says that he was retried and convicted.
Okay, well that's good enough for me. I mean, he's going to be in jail, so it would have been better if he had pleaded though, because I don't know. I mean, it's 11 years, so all the appeals are exhausted, I'm sure.
Yeah, I definitely am hoping that he'll just stay there at this point. That is absolutely awful. And I found a bunch of the court documents in this case. I have not gone through to sort of decide what to do with them yet. I don't think any of those are going to end up included in here. It's beyond the fascinating, God, these people are terrible.
There's nothing that is really relevant except area-wise.
Yeah, it's only relevant area-wise, and it's really not an unsolved case. It just sort of ended up in the pile because of how disturbing it was.
I mean, it is an interesting case, though, and at first, you have to wonder.
And next week, we'll start to wrap up Colorado with some more interesting missing persons cases and unsolved murders. Thanks for joining us. You can reach us at 252-365-5593 or at truecrimexcess.com or truecrimexcess@gmail.com if you want to send us a note. This episode was brought to you by LabrottieCreations.com. That's LABROTTIECREATIONS.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun Pop Pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pets. Use the promo code CRIMEXS, that's CRIMEXS, for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art of your own pet at their site, LabrottieCreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. The theme song was Indestructible by Noah Smith. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform or at TeePublic, Instagram, or Twitter. You can also join us on Patreon to fund future body exploration trips. But the best thing you can do for us is leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and share us with your friends. And we'll see you next time. This is True Crime XS. This is from the American Scholar, published by Phi Beta Kappa, and it's from the March 5th, 2018 article. It's written by Kristen Iverson, and it's called When Death Came to Golden, a writer's strange entanglement with one of the 20th century's most prolific serial killers. In June 1977, following my first year of college, I took a job driving a roach coach, an old converted pickup truck that brought food to workers at construction sites near my neighborhood just outside of Denver. The truck was white with diamond-patterned aluminum doors on both sides that swung up to expose ice chests filled with sodas and half-pint cardboard cartons of milk. I sold stale ham sandwiches, Cokes, and moon pies to boys just a few years older than I was, boys who were shirtless and muscled and hungry. One day, a new boy, a shy boy, bought a sandwich, and as soon as the other boys had walked away, asked if I might want to meet for dinner. Mark was quiet and polite and seemed a little lost. I said yes. We met at an Italian restaurant where we sat on the patio under a moonlit sky. Over pepperoni pizza, our first date conversation turned intimate and intense. Abruptly, he leaned forward, his brown eyes troubled, and told me his sister had disappeared 2 years earlier. For months, no one knew where she was, and then she was found dead. Mark said Shelley was tall like me, 5'8" or so, with hazel eyes and long brown hair parted in the middle. She was slim and pretty in a girl next door kind of way. The day she disappeared, she was wearing what we all wore back then, bell-bottom jeans, a t-shirt with the name of a rock band on the front, maybe Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and hiking boots. Hiking boots were de rigueur for Colorado girls. We were tough. We were untethered. We reveled in all the freedoms the 60s and 70s seemed to promise young girls like us. We tried smoking pot and backpacking and sleeping with boys, things our mothers never did. We thought about medical school or law school, even though our families couldn't afford it, even though our fathers disapproved. Hitchhiking was common. Everyone did it. You could hitch from Denver to Boulder, or Boulder to Birmingham, or ride all the way to the West Coast if you wanted. Like Shelley, I wore my hair parted in the middle, long, and straight down my back. It turns out that Ted Bundy preferred women with long hair parted in the middle. Police found a gas receipt from a station in Golden, dated just days before Shelley disappeared, crumpled under the passenger seat of Bundy's white VW Bug. 20 minutes from Denver, Golden is the self-proclaimed gateway to the Rockies. Winding neighborhoods rise into the foothills backed by the first row of the Rocky Mountains, stark blue and green, a jagged spine extending along the horizon. The town is filled with taverns, coffee shops, pizza parlors, and back then, the historic Foss drugstore, now gone. Golden has been a company town since 1873, when German immigrants Adolf Coors and Jacob Schuler arrived and started a brewery. When Prohibition began in 1920, Adolf was forced to dump nearly 20,000 gallons of beer into Clear Creek. Just down the street, his friend, Henry Heine Foss, sold Coors beers and 100-proof bourbon whiskey available with a prescription at his drugstore, strictly for medicinal purposes. These days, when you drive down Main Street, you're still met with an arch that stretches from one side of the street to the other with "Howdy folks, welcome to Golden" in a loopy script. And then, in smaller letters, capitalized for emphasis, "Where the West lives." People like to say there are no strangers in Golden. In the mid-70s, there were 2 gas stations. The one where Bundy stopped to fill his tank before picking up Shelley was an old Sinclair station just off the main drag. Even today, there's a friendly emerald green brontosaurus on the sign. Volkswagen Bugs were popular then, representing a kind of post-1960s philosophy of peace and love and freedom, and they held up well as you banged them up and down those back mountain roads. Mine was cherry red with a half rainbow in the back window and a small ski rack on top. Snug as a bug in a rug. My Bug was my symbol of freedom. Freedom from my parents, freedom from my adolescence, freedom from the suffocating sense of invisibility I'd felt in high school. I paid for it in cash, having saved up months of tips from waiting tables. That Bug was an about face from the car I'd learned to drive on. My grandfather's 1963 Rambler with a stick shift, and a windshield clouded with cigarette smoke. I loved and loathed that car until the day my grandfather paid a guy $50 to take it away. "We're selling it for a song," he told me. Ted Bundy learned to drive in a Rambler too. It belonged to his mother. Years later, in a prison interview, he said it embarrassed him to drive a car so common, so pedestrian, so uncool. He was ashamed to be seen in it. What he really wanted was a VW Bug, just like me. That was the summer David Bowie's Golden Years filled the air. Look at that sky. Life's begun. Nights are warm, and the days are young. On our second date, Mark and I went to see Star Wars. We stood in line for hours, me in my long jean skirt and hair in braids, Mark in his Levi's with a leather belt and a well-worn buckle with a mountain on it. Soon, I started spending nights at his place, a tiny one-bedroom house that had once been a ticket office for the railroad. At the end of the summer, I went back to college, and Mark took a job at a hardware store. He played guitar Thursday nights at the Denver Folklore Center, and I would drive down in my Bug to sit in the back row and watch as he sang, played, and laughed with the crowd. In person, Mark was quiet and withdrawn, but on stage, he came alive. He was 23, 4 years older than me, and right off the bat, he wanted to get married. Lots of kids and a picket fence, he said. His family had been splintered. His parents had divorced. His 2 older brothers had moved away, and always there was the one thing, his sister's murder, that they couldn't talk about. His mother, Roberta, still lived in the same house where the kids had grown up, built by Mark's dad decades ago. The day we met, Roberta took my hand in hers and cupped it as if I were her own daughter. Mark's father lived outside of town with his new wife, a woman with orange hair and leopard-patterned pants who poured us tall glasses of red wine and took our photo as we sat on her sofa. "You and Mark could save this family," Roberta said. At the time, I wasn't sure what she meant. That summer, life seemed full of contradictions. I felt heady with the promised freedom of women's rights and civil rights, the idea of breaking free from traditional expectations. And yet in Golden, we were all good girls, nice girls, raised in modest homes in the suburbs. We did well in school, we were polite. Our mothers told us not to raise our voices or question authority. We didn't play sports. Jogging was considered a passing fad, and 24-hour fitness centers didn't exist. Title IX was still new. Girls weren't supposed to have muscles. Girls weren't supposed to fight. Girls weren't supposed to strike back. We were cheerleaders, or we sat on the sidelines. Shelley was a good girl. After graduating from Arvada High School, she spent a year with the United Church of Christ at a mission in Biloxi, Mississippi. She returned to Colorado and studied Spanish at Red Rocks Community College. Her class spent a semester abroad in a Mexican fishing village. Later, Shelley went back to visit the people she knew there. She spent a year working and traveling in Alaska. Mark told me that her mother had encouraged Shelley to travel and experience the world. You can always come back to your hometown, she had told her. The newspaper reported that Shelley had had a fight with her boyfriend. He let her out of the car, and she was trying to hitchhike home. I don't know if this is true. The same story has been told about more than one Bundy victim. Many women adored Ted Bundy. During the 9 years he spent in prison, he received hundreds of letters each month, mostly from female admirers. Bundy married a woman who numbered among the dozens who showed up at his trials and hearings. They had a daughter, conceived during a forbidden conjugal visit. Bundy's wife eventually ended her contact with him and did not attend his execution. She and her daughter moved away and are said to have changed their names. Sociopaths are opportunists. Studies show that they are unusually perceptive at spotting weakness or vulnerability, particularly in women. They're not afraid to seize the moment, and sometimes it's not the person, but the situation. Girls sleeping in a sorority house, a child walking home from school, a student on her way to the library for an evening study session. Bundy was a necrophiliac as well as a sociopath. He liked to place his bodies in locations where he could return again and again. Sometimes he brought hair and makeup products. I couldn't save Mark's family. I know this now. I couldn't save Shelley, whose brief life had already been forgotten and erased by the town, by the media, and by the nation. I couldn't save Mark's father, a blue-collar man who worked hard all his life and had to bear sorrows no man should have to bear. I couldn't save Mark's mother, who for years left Shelley's bedroom untouched. It turns out I couldn't even save Mark. Colorado is famous for letting Ted Bundy escape twice. A year after Shelley disappeared, Bundy was being held pending charges for a separate murder in the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs. He was transferred to the Pitkin County Courthouse in nearby Aspen for a preliminary hearing on June 7, 1977. Bundy, a former law student, asked for permission, granted by the judge, to act as his own attorney, thereby excusing him from wearing leg shackles and handcuffs. One day, while the court was in recess, Bundy asked to visit the courthouse law library on the pretense of researching his defense. As soon as the guard left him alone, he slipped behind a bookcase, opened a window, and jumped 2 stories to the grass below. A passerby noticed but did nothing, and when she entered the courthouse, she asked very politely, "Is it common for people to jump out of courthouse windows?" By then, Bundy had pulled off an outer layer of clothing and was walking openly down the streets of Aspen, a town like Golden, but with more money, higher mountains, and big movie stars. He had sprained his right ankle in the fall and walked with a limp. He heard that roadblocks had been set up around town, so he hiked up Aspen Mountain, famous for its ski slopes, but now covered in wildflowers. He broke into a hunting cabin near the summit, where he took food, clothes, and a rifle. He set out for the nearby town of Crested Butte, but got lost in the woods along the way. After 3 days on the run, still in pain from the ankle, he broke into a camping trailer, stole more food and a ski parka, and started hiking downhill. Eventually, he found himself at the edge of the Aspen golf course. He hotwired a car. 2 police officers pulled him over and arrested him when they noticed the vehicle driving erratically down the road. Bundy had been on the run for 6 days. 6 months later, back in jail in Glenwood Springs, he engineered another escape. With the help of friends inside and out, he obtained a hacksaw blade, $500, and a floor plan of the jail building. For weeks, each evening, while his cellmates showered, he patiently sawed a 1-foot square between the steel bars and the ceiling of his cell. He stopped eating and lost 35 pounds, and on December 30th, 1977, with most of the jail's staff on Christmas break, Bundy piled books and legal files under the blanket of his bed in the shape of a sleeping body. Then he climbed out through the hole and into the crawl space above and dropped down into the apartment of the chief jailer, who happened to be out spending the evening with his wife. Bundy changed into the jailer's street clothes and walked straight out the front door. Once again, he hotwired a car, but it broke down on eastbound I-70. A friendly driver gave him a ride to Vail, where he caught a bus to Denver and boarded a flight to Chicago. By the time the guards discovered the disguise in his bed 17 hours later, the plane had landed, and Bundy was gone. More than a year passed before he was caught. He traveled from Chicago to Michigan and then took a bus to Tallahassee, posing as a student at Florida State University and renting a room in a boarding house. On January 15, 1978, Bundy murdered Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy while they were sleeping in their beds at the Chi Omega sorority house. He then stole a van from the university and began driving. And on February 9th, Kimberly Leach went missing from her junior high school in Lake City. Police tried to trace Bundy's route through receipts from stolen credit cards as he stopped for food and gas. On February 15th in Pensacola, he was pulled over once again for erratic driving and arrested. He was at the wheel of a stolen VW Bug. 2 months later, Kimberly Leach's body, sexually assaulted, beaten, and decomposed, was found under a collapsed hog shed, and like Bundy's other victims, she was pretty and had long hair parted in the middle. But she was 12. Many girls tried to talk their way out of it. In a police interview, Bundy described what happened when 18-year-old Georgianne Hawkins started talking. One of the things that makes it a little bit difficult is she was quite lucid talking about things. It's not funny, but it's kind of odd, the things that people will say under those circumstances. She said she had a Spanish test the next day, and she thought that I had taken her to help tutor her for the Spanish test. It's kind of an odd thing to say. He paused and then continued with the practicalities. The long and short of it is that I again knocked her unconscious. I strangled her, and I drug her about 10 yards into a small grove of trees. He showed no remorse. My mother, whose own marriage had been disastrous, counseled me to marry and settle down. I loved Mark, but I wasn't quite ready for that white picket fence. I wanted to finish college and see the world and make something of myself. Still, I didn't want to lose him. He was kind, he was gentle. He was certainly one of the most altruistic people I'd ever met. My childhood and adolescence had been a roller coaster of family crisis, and he seemed like a safe shelter from the storm. But I was only 19. "I'll wait for you," he said. "Please wait for me." So we agreed to marry someday and saw each other on weekends and holidays. We spent time with each other's families, Roberta encouraging me to be a writer. His stepmother said I should learn how to cook and began to plan wedding invitations. One girl, raped and left for dead, did manage to get away, although luck played an extraordinary role. Rhonda Stapley, a 21-year-old pharmacy student at the University of Utah, was waiting at a bus stop when a man in a white VW Bug pulled over and offered her a lift. She thought he was cute, and when she climbed in, he was kind and polite. He didn't talk much, she said. But when he did, his voice was confident and his conversation was articulate. They drove a while, and then he turned up a mountain road and stopped in a secluded area next to a rushing stream. He shut off the engine. He wanted to kiss her, but I didn't want to kiss him, she said. I didn't know how to get out of the situation without embarrassing myself by making a fuss. When Rhonda regained consciousness, she was lying on the ground next to the Bug, while Bundy busied himself on the other side, organizing the items that he carried in the back seat. A lug wrench, twine, duct tape, a large knife in a wooden case, a meat cleaver, and crutches, which he sometimes used to fake an injury. Her jeans were around her ankles, and she couldn't rise or run as she rolled away from the car. She fell into the stream. As the water carried her over rocks and branches, she kicked off her jeans and crawled out, bruised and naked, but alive, several miles downstream. We all hitchhiked. We all trusted strangers. We believed in the general goodness of all things. Once, when all of his 4 kids were packed in the backseat of the station wagon and fighting like alley cats, my mother pulled over to the side of the road. "Stop it," she demanded. "I can't drive." We giggled together in open rebellion. "If you can't sit quietly," my mother said, "you're going to have to walk home." "Fine," my younger sister said, and she got out of the car. She was 12. "I'll see you at home," she said. My mother drove off. 10 minutes later, She circled back, but my sister was gone. 2 more hours passed before she showed up late for dinner, smirking, a little bit, pleased as punch. I burned with envy at her independent spirit. Shelley Robertson disappeared on Monday, June 29, 1975. In late August, 2 engineering students were hiking in the mountains just outside Golden. They found Shelley's nude, decomposing body in a mine shaft, still bound with duct tape. Little else is known about her death. My VW Bug frequently overheated, forcing me to pull over to the side of the road and wait. Sometimes it refused to even start. One afternoon, I planned to drive to Denver to meet my mother for dinner. The Bug was lifeless. The starter clicked and then went silent. I hiked out to the highway, and I put out my thumb. It was a hot, dry day, and the sun shone in that bright, direct way that is peculiar to Colorado. It felt good on my face, and I remember being thirsty. I often carried a warm Coke in my backpack, but this day I had only my purse, leather with fringe, with a couple of dollars inside. Rush hour traffic hadn't started, and only a few cars whizzed by. Finally, just as I was ready to give up and head back to my apartment, a sedan slowed down and pulled over. A Ford Galaxy, pale yellow with cream seats. The driver looked like he was in his early 40s, well-dressed. Maybe he was on his way back to his office. He reached over and opened the door from inside. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Arvada," I said. It was an hour's drive. "Hop in," he said. "I'm headed that direction." He had long, slender fingers, and they tapped the wheel as he pulled back onto the highway. After a few minutes, he reached over and locked my door, as if this was something he always did. He didn't seem to want to talk, so I just sat there in silence. We drove for about 20 minutes, and then he turned off on an exit. "Where are we going?" I asked. "The back roads," he said. "Less traffic." But there was almost no traffic. The highway was a straight shot. There was no reason to take a back road. I nearly said this out loud and realized that this had nothing to do with traffic. We turned onto a single-lane road, going very fast. I looked out the window at the fields racing by, and he put his right hand on my left knee. His grip tightened. It was hard to believe that this was happening. I thought of Shelley, and I thought about opening the door and jumping out. In my horseback riding lessons, I had learned how to tuck and roll, and I thought I might be able to roll off the pavement onto the shoulder of the road. But the side of the highway whizzed by in a blur, and the man was silent. His face was expressionless. My mouth went dry. I felt lightheaded, disconnected from my body, and my heart was thudding, and my tongue felt thick. I started talking. "Where are you from?" I asked. "What's your name?" He didn't answer. He looked serious, furious. I said, "My name is Chris. I have 2 sisters and a brother. We have a dog named Pug. I take riding lessons on Thursday night. My horse's name is Sassy." He didn't look at me. I was talking too fast. "One of my sisters plays the flute, and the other is a gymnast. My little brother likes to play jokes on his sisters, but we always get him back." It sounded so stupid. He kept his hand tight on my knee. I willed myself to stop shaking. I made myself slow down, keeping my voice low and calm. "I have a boyfriend named Mark who plays the guitar and likes to go rock climbing. He's tall with brown hair and hazel eyes. He's not sure about college. I have to study tonight for chemistry. It's my worst subject. I thought I would be a veterinarian, but I'm not sure I can pass chemistry." There was no response. He kept his eyes on the road. I told him about my best friend from high school who'd just gotten engaged. "I'm going to be your maid of honor. I've never been a maid of honor, and it makes me nervous." I told him my mother was waiting to have dinner with me when she got off her shift at the nursing home. She loved being a nurse, but the hours were long. We'd probably order Cobb salads and Chardonnay. I wondered if he was scared, too. His grip on my thigh grew so tight it hurt. I might change majors. I think I might want to be a writer, maybe someday. The air in the car grew hot and clammy, and I thought I might faint. I couldn't think of anything else to say. But then he jerked to the side of the road and braked in a spray of gravel. "Get out," he said. "Get out." I fell sprawling out of the car and tumbled down the embankment. I heard the car door slam. I lay with my cheek in the dirt until the car roared off. I waited until I couldn't hear it anymore, and then I waited a little longer. It took me 4 hours to reach a gas station. I stayed down in the gully, walking through the weeds and soft sand and water. Every time a car passed, I huddled down at the gas station. I used a payphone to call my mother to come pick me up. I didn't tell her what happened. I never told anyone what happened. I felt guilty and dirty. I felt like it was my fault. I never hitchhiked again. Why did the man with the slender fingers let me out of the car? Perhaps it was because I told him the details of my life, my dog, my mother, my boyfriend. Maybe it was God, maybe it was fate, maybe it was extraordinary luck, or maybe he was just an opportunist who lost his nerve. In his final hours, Bundy called his mother Louise twice at her home in Tacoma, Washington. He kept saying how sorry he was and said that there's another part of me that people don't know. She said, adding that he sounded very much at peace with himself. At the end of the second call, she told him, "You'll always be my precious son." One afternoon, a sunny afternoon in October, when Mark and I had been seeing each other for over a year, he went rock climbing with a friend. Mark had climbed for years in Colorado and Mexico, and he and his friend Gary decided to drive up to a popular climbing spot in Boulder Canyon to practice rappelling. A rope slipped and pulled from the face of the rock. I was taking a meditation class at church that evening when my mother called to pull me out of class. "Come home," she said. She made me sit down at the kitchen table before she gave me the news. Mark had been living in a small apartment on 34th Avenue in Denver. He was 24. 2 days after his death, his brother Rick took me to the apartment. It was tidy and untouched. A half-full coffee cup was sitting on the table. We went upstairs to the bedroom, and Rick told me to take whatever I'd like to have. I froze at the door, and the only thing I could see was a teddy bear on the bed that I'd given Mark as a Valentine's Day present. Kind of joke. He liked to hike, he liked the mountains, he liked bears. I still have that bear. 14 years after Shelley died, in the hours before his execution, Bundy confessed to dozens of murders. He had delayed his appointment with the electric chair for 9 years and 277 days, and he thought he might delay it a little more. He provided concrete, specific evidence of the murders of 16 women and admitted to involvement in at least 30 others in Colorado, Utah, Washington, and Florida. The final tally, which will never be known, is at least 70, likely over 100. The youngest proven victim was 12, although he was strongly suspected of killing an 8-year-old. The oldest was 26, and most were 18 or 19. Bundy seemed desperate in his last-minute deluge of details, talking fast like some of his victims must have done. He listed names, places, and his particular methods of murder. He described the look women get in their eyes just as they die. It was an intimate moment, he said. Previously, he admitted to murdering Shelley Robertson, but refused to provide details. It was the only acknowledged murder he wouldn't talk about. Even he seemed to shudder at the memory. Bundy's final interview was with James Dobson, a preacher who in 1977 founded the Christian conservative organization Focus on the Family. Bundy hoped Dobson would stay his execution once again, while Dobson hoped a taped interview with Bundy would help with fundraising. With Dobson's prompting, Bundy changed his story and agreed with Dobson that pornography had caused his violent behavior. It went all the way back to the 1940s, Bundy embellished, when as a boy he found lurid comic books and detective novels in neighborhood garbage bins that featured women being tortured and killed. The interview did not prolong Bundy's life, but Dobson used it to fill his organization's coffers. On the day of Bundy's execution, January 24, 1989, hundreds of people gathered across the street from the Florida State Prison in Starkey. In addition to receiving the death penalty for the 1978 sexual slaying of the 12-year-old girl, Kimberly Leach, Bundy was convicted of murdering the 2 sorority sisters at Florida State University. Fraternity boys stood in groups wearing hand-lettered T-shirts, Bundy BBQ, Roast in Peace, and Hey Ted, this buzz is for you, and Bundy World Tour sold out. Other gatherers banged on frying pans and chanted, "Burn, Bundy, burn." A few people sang songs they had written about him, including one to the tune of On Top of Old Smoky. A few feet away, several dozen death penalty opponents stood silently, some praying and holding lighted candles. At 7:16 a.m., a journalist left the Q wing of Florida State Prison, raised his hands, and waved a white flag, the sign that Bundy was dead. The crowd cheered, and the hearse carrying the body was held up by traffic that jammed the road for hours. Some of those in the crowd were parents of victims. "I feel numb in a way," one woman said. "My daughter's murder was taken care of. He paid for what he did." But she still felt unsatisfied. "It seemed like I was sentenced to a lifetime of waiting. Now there's really nothing to wait for." Roberta Robinson also stood in that crowd, in the row of candle holders. "Killing Ted Bundy won't make me feel better, and it won't bring back Shelley," she told a journalist. A lot of people seem to want it out of a vengeance, but it gives people a false sense of security, and it's terribly expensive. Shelley was 24 when she died. Mark was 24 when he died. I lived to see 24 and 34 and 44 and more. More than 30 years have passed since these events, yet I am still haunted by the image of the man who would have been my husband and the woman who might have been my sister-in-law. My ghost husband, my ghost sister. Why did I get to live and they did not? The day Bundy died, he showered, had his head and lower right leg shaved, and then put on dark blue pants and a light blue shirt. He wore manacles on each wrist. 2 correctional officers escorted him to the death chamber, where 24 witnesses were waiting. He sat down in the electric chair. The officers placed straps over his arms, leg, waist, and chest, with a final strap over his chin and a metal cap on his head. He was asked if he had any last words. "Give my love to my family and friends," he said, and a black veil was placed over his face. Many years later, I saw Roberta at the drugstore. We had lost touch, and she didn't recognize me. She was paying for some small item with coins from a zippered purse. Her face was deeply lined, and her hair was gray. Her clothes could have been 10 years old or 20, maybe more. A pair of blue corduroy pants and a sweater too large for her small frame, just as I remembered. She pushed the coins around on the counter, exchanged some pleasant words with the clerk, and shuffled out. I wondered if she was still living in the same house. I wondered if Shelley's clothes were still hanging in the closet, and if Mark's hiking boots were still in the hall. I thought of tapping her on the shoulder and saying hello. I considered what I might say. She had lost 2 children. Roberta's grief had seemed so intimate and profound that my words could only have been painfully trivial. Even then, I still carried Mark's death like a knife in my gut. I had learned that you don't get over grief like that. You just learn to carry it inside and try to live with it. I watched her walk out the door, and I have regretted that moment ever since. Maybe this essay is about Roberta. Maybe it's just about getting up day after day, year after year, and not giving in to the bitterness of the world. I sold that VW Bug not long after Bundy got caught for the last time. Like my old Rambler, it went for a song. The tires were bald, the engine was dead, the rainbow in the back window faded to a pale ribbon of red. I pocketed the crumpled $100 bill from the buyer and watched a tow truck take it down the street. Roberta was 92 years old when she died. I read in the newspaper she had recently written a play that was produced in the local theater. She was working on a second one, a family drama, at the time of her death, but the manuscript had been lost.
I've been chasing my